HIPAA Invoices. In this particular video, we're going to take a look at invoices and some of the nuances as they apply to HIPAA. We're going to take a look at a few examples, and we're going to talk about the security and privacy rule, as well as internal integrations within your organization and external integrations with other lab, pharmacy, or other external software like shipping, for example. All right, with that said, let's get into it. Okay, so to kick things off, we're going to take a look at a pretty standard example of the invoices grid view. Now, this is what a user sees whenever they're logging into their HIPAA user dashboard. Now, in this particular view, you can see that we have a nice list of the invoices. We have a status on the invoices, and then we also have filtering and sorting within the grid view. So then we can go in to look at a detail view. And on the detail view, we can also pay multiple invoices. So this is really cool because whenever you're going in to deal with invoices and you're dealing in a HIPAA type of environment, you may be paying off a bill, like a medical bill that's an old medical bill, and you may need to pay multiple invoices. There also could be a scenario where the user needs to make a recurring payment. So here we would have the option of presenting to the user a recurring payment. We can also incorporate the ability to modify the amount for each of these invoices. So you can pay the full amount or pay a partial amount. You can also come in and change the payment method so that it could be a payment for insurance, or using insurance rather, Medicare, Medicaid, or insurance. It could also be an ACH rather, or an e-check payment that they could make as well. So these are some of the options that the user may want to consider. They may, and we'll take a look at this in a moment, they may want to set up a recurring payment so that they can pay it off over time. And we may want to provide them with a minimum recurring payment that they need to make. But this is just kind of a view where they're paying multiple invoices. And then you can also see a detail view where they can look at the invoice itself. Now, typically an invoice is going to be essentially after an order is fulfilled. And this just kind of depends on the business itself. Sometimes an invoice is going to be coming from an EMR or EHR system. Sometimes it's going to be just the way that you get your payments. And it just really depends on how you operate the business. But this can typically be coming in from a pharmacy integration, EMR, EHR, CRM, you name it. And we can pull these in from other systems and allow the user to interact with them within your HIPAA portal. So this can apply for medical billing. It can apply for just a general e-commerce or pharmacy online. This can include lab tests, being able to do a lot of different things with your HIPAA platform. Okay, so now once they're looking at this detail view, you can see that they have the option to see basic information about the order. They can see the line items for the order. They can also reorder the items, so they can see the option to add individual items to their cart or the entire order. They can also review some of the detailed aspects of each of the items in the order, as well as the fees, the shipping, the taxes, etc. Now, we also include by default the ability to take actions. So this can include printing a view of the invoice, paying the invoice. There could be a return request if you want to enable that. And really the list goes on. So they could do several different things. Most of the time for a HIPAA invoice, we're not going to be presenting a lot of PHI data other than the obvious, just kind of having the line items and their contact info. That alone can be considered PHI. And we'll talk a little bit about the security and the privacy aspects of this later. But typically you want to keep the amount of information minimal on the invoice. You're not necessarily going to want to include a lot of other PHI on the order. But if you did want to, it's definitely possible. Now, the big thing we want you to consider with this, and we just ask you to kind of think about who you're working with as a vendor, is where are you going to go with your invoice capabilities as you progress your platform? Are you going to do external integrations? Are you going to set up a kind of capability for the user to pay via check or Medicare, Medicaid, or their insurance? Are they going to be able to pay based on account or a net terms? Anything like that, this particular platform can handle. And we recommend considering that as you kind of evaluate what options you're looking at. Okay, let's take a look at a few examples now of HIPAA invoices in the wild, if you will. Okay, so in this particular example, we're taking a look at a medical billing platform. Now, this medical billing platform has a lot of capabilities. One of the key aspects is the ability to brand and essentially white label their portal system for other companies. So they own this portal software that we made for them, and it can be branded for their customers. Their customers may include medical practices, hospital organizations, other covered entities that are trying to get their clients to pay for outstanding bills, work that's been completed. So here you can see that a particular user is logged in and they've gone into the detail view for a particular invoice. Now for this invoice, they can then go in and prep a payment. So they can click the pay invoice button. And here they can see the option to just pay it in full, or they can see the option to enroll in recurring payments. And here's where we can present to them some really interesting options. So we can present to them a minimum payment amount, give them some idea of penalties or fees if that's applicable. We can also dynamically pull this data in. So all of these invoices that you're seeing in this list view are actually dynamically pulling in from an external API that is secure, that is pumping data in and just the data that we need for this particular user. Now, based on the user logging in and authenticating and being authorized to view these invoices, in other words, we're looking at the role of the user and what invoices are tied to just each user. Now this user is only seeing their invoices, and they can come in and view the details and get all of the line item information for their particular payments. So they can see any payments that they've already made and the outstanding amount due. And then they can, again, make the payment. So they can make a single payment or multiple payments. This is really cool. This also can include other payment methods than just going through this simple model. But this is just kind of a nice, clean presentation. And whenever you look at it from a user perspective, ideally with HIPAA, as much as anything else, we want it to be really simple. We want the user to understand visually what's going on and then be able to take action and not get stuck. It needs to be very self-service oriented. Okay, with that said, let's take a look at another example. Okay, so in this particular example, we're taking a look at an online pharmacy. Now this pharmacy application is pretty interesting because you can see in this grid view that we have basically a set of statuses, but we can also go ahead and from here, we can make a payment or we can view the details. So if we go in and look at the details, here you can see that we have the option to print or pay the invoice. So we're not showing the full set of actions here. And again, this is kind of a theme that you'll see whenever it comes to user interaction. We want to recommend keeping it simple. Okay, now whenever they're on this detail view, something that's really interesting is if they have multiple line items, they have the ability to track the shipping. So this data is interacting with a pharmacy application, and the pharmacy application has a data format that we're pulling in, and we're pulling in the individual line item status based on their shipments. So if they're shipped, we've got the tracking information. They can actually click and track each individual line item within this view of their invoices. Pretty cool. And then of course they can reorder or reorder all, reorder on an individual line item or the whole order. The last thing that we want to point out here, just kind of in general, is if you go into, let me see if I can find it here. If you go into one of these particular items, so you could turn on an RMA process. And this is what that would look like. So we have another video that goes into RMAs, but whenever it comes to HIPAA, this can be a really specific thing. We want to be careful about who has access to what information for the user. And again, we want to make it a very simple process. So if you do want to turn on RMAs, you probably want to go into detail and just make sure that you're complying with HIPAA for that process. Okay, let's take a look at another example now. Okay, so for this example, we've got a pretty common grid view that you've seen a lot now in this video. Whenever we go into this grid view, we have the option to pay for multiple invoices. Now, you've also seen this, but what's interesting about this is they have a different customization to this view. So the earlier view was more of a list of all of the invoices. This one just lists the invoices that they've selected. And here you can see that they can select a different card and different billing address than their defaults. So they can come in and specify that. If they want, they can choose other payment options. So they can include e-check or paying via their medical insurance. And if they choose a credit card, they have this note at the bottom that they're actually going to have to pay these processing fees, and they're going to have to pay a charge on top of the percentage fee. Now, this is pretty common on some sites, but most sites don't have this. So this is a really interesting thing that we want to point out, that if you're doing a lot of volume and if you're just kind of thinking about where you're going over the next 3 to 5 years with your HIPAA e-commerce or HIPAA portal, whatever type of application you're using that would include HIPAA invoices, this is probably going to be something to consider. And is the vendor you're working with going to be capable of doing that? So we certainly recommend having that kind of dialogue with your potential HIPAA vendor and asking them about their long-term capabilities with the investment you're making right now. Okay, so anyway, you can go in and you can pay the invoice via different formats and get the messaging and kind of allow the user to have the right expectations on the fees. Now, whenever they go to one of their invoice detail views, this is also really cool. So you can see that they have this tab to select the orders and then one for the invoices. Typically in this workflow, the orders are essentially something that the customer is placing online, and an invoice may be something that they're calling in and they're talking to a customer support rep and they're placing an order over the phone. And then they're getting invoiced for that and they need to pay for it. Maybe they're paying for it on account. Maybe this is a pharmacy that is ordering a lot of items for their patients, for example. And so they want to order in bulk and then pay for it via their account and do a net 30 check payment, for example. So they can actually come in and check on the status of items they've ordered online, items they've ordered through this invoice method, and then that data is integrated dynamically back into their dashboard. Really, really cool stuff to bring that in, bring it all together. One of the cool things here that you can see is we're actually able to split the items out based on their shipment. So in this particular view, we have a sales group, as it's called, and each of the different shipments is represented in this kind of list. So here you can see there's just one shipment that went out. But if there were multiple, they could choose between the different multiple shipments, see all the items, see when the item is expected to arrive, etc. And then if they have a balance due, they can make a payment. So this is a really interesting way to present this so that the user can kind of see the overall order and they can see the item groups within the order for their shipments, etc. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is just kind of wrap up and share with you some next steps and some high-level topics around the security and the privacy aspects for HIPAA. Okay, so thank you for making it to the end of the video. One of the big things about HIPAA is security and privacy. Now, whenever you're dealing with invoices, we want to make sure that you're really thinking about minimal amount of data that you need to include and only including that within your different entities and fields for HIPAA. Whenever you're kind of logging and giving access to information, not just capturing it initially, you also want to be thinking about security and privacy as well. So if you're reporting and you're conducting internal reviews of data, for example, you do want to make sure that you're not including information into reports and different views that you don't have to. And you're going to want to be kind of respectful of the security rule. And I'll give you some general bullets here. Basically encrypting the data at rest, encrypting it in transit, making sure that whenever you are getting access to the data or anyone in your team, they are authenticated. In other words, they've properly logged in. And ideally, we have a multi-factor authentication model in place. A lot of times you'll hear it referred to as a zero trust environment. So we're basically enforcing this concept that we don't trust anyone. We also want to make sure that we are logging everything and we're logging who is accessing what and what they are changing if they are changing anything. And then finally, and this really is not the kind of end all be all about all the details, but we also want to consider privacy. Now on the privacy front, a few bullets to consider, and this is just kind of a high level, but we want to make sure that we're prepared to not only protect the user's information and minimally collect only what we need, but we also want to be in a position where if the user asks us to remove it, we can instantly do that effectively in a reasonable time frame. And if they ask us to provide it to them to export it so they can share it with another covered entity, we can do that as well. So do you have a self-service capability around those areas? If you don't, if you're not considering that, if the vendor you're working with isn't considering that, we highly recommend that you stop, make sure that you understand these rules and make sure that you're asking your software vendor about all of these things. Doesn't it make sense to work with a vendor who really understands HIPAA? That's something we encourage you to think about. With that said, the Clarity team offers a complimentary discovery, and we certainly encourage you, if you're interested, to take advantage of our complimentary discovery process. It's a free and no hassle way to interact with our very specialized team who can diagnose your project and give you kind of a strategic set of recommendations. If there is a fit for us to work together, we'll be happy to provide you with proposed terms and options for engaging. If there isn't, we'll be very glad to share information with you, complimentary about your project, detailed notes, kind of a game plan and recommended next steps for you to pursue so that you can ideally get a great start on your HIPAA project or continue to move in the right direction if you're already underway. We thank you again for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, if you would, give us a like. And if you're interested in seeing more, feel free to hit subscribe. And we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.